Federal investigators have executed warrants both at the home of Rudy Giuliani's and also his office. Now, keep in mind that he had been facing an investigation by prosecutors in Manhattan. Now it appears that the warrants, which they had been looking to execute last year, have been provided. So federal investigators were able to show up and see if there was anything of interest in both his home and his office. Investigators executed warrants at Giuliani's home on Madison Avenue and his office on Park Avenue and seized electronic devices. Now, what is this investigation about? I mean, so many people have been investigated in Trump's orbit that it's understandable, it's hard to keep track of all of it. However, this investigation does have to do with Giuliani's lobbying work on behalf of Ukrainian officials. So Giuliani was central to Trump's efforts to dig up dirt against Democratic rival Joe Biden and to press Ukraine for an investigation, and this was a politically motivated investigation, of course, into Biden and his son Hunter, who himself now faces a criminal tax probe by the Justice Department. Now, Giuliani also sought to undermine former US Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, who was pushed out on Trump's orders and met several times with a Ukrainian lawmaker who released edited recordings of Biden in an effort to smear him before the election. So we had covered that impeachment in a lot of detail. It was very clear that Donald Trump had engaged in a quid pro quo in attempting to get the Ukrainian leader to announce some sort of sham investigation into the Bidens. And in exchange, Trump would release congressionally appropriated funds that were supposed to be given to Ukraine without this ridiculous quid pro quo taking place, of course. That's why Trump was impeached the first time. Now, in this case, it appears that Giuliani was doing work on behalf of foreign officials and did not disclose that information. Fox News had a few more details about this. Let's take a quick look at that video.
According to the Wall Street Journal, which is also owned by the same parent company as Fox News, and who, quoting Bob Costello, his attorney, the search warrant had to do with the Foreign Agents Registration Act, looking at the possibility that Giuliani might have been working at the behest of foreign agents to lobby the United States without registering as a foreign agent or informing the Justice Department. According to Costello, the warrant sought communications between Rudy Giuliani and individuals, including John Solomon, who of course is a well-known columnist who was in communication with Rudy Giuliani about efforts to push for investigations of Joe Biden in the Ukraine.
Solomon is also an important figure here. This is an individual who used to work over at the Washington Times, another conservative outlet. He has been very close to Donald Trump and has really led the charge in putting out positive news articles about Donald Trump and his administration. It's also been reported that Solomon played a key role in persuading Donald Trump to try to get the leader of Ukraine to engage in some sort of sham investigation into the Bidens. So he's a key figure here. Obviously, Rudy Giuliani not only is a key figure, but really went out of his way to make himself a key figure as the impeachment proceedings were taking place. That was when he really stepped up to be Donald Trump's incredibly ineffective lawyer, effectively embarrassing himself and then continuing to do so through the election and even after the election by claiming that there was widespread voter fraud, which of course has never been proven. Now, with that said, what I find fascinating about this is that Rudy Giuliani went out of his way to make himself, put himself in the public eye, knowing that Paul Manafort had been prosecuted and convicted for the very things that he's being investigated now, including failing to register as a foreign agent as he was working on behalf of Russian officials. Now, he ended up spending some time in prison as a result of that. And that, of course, is in addition to a bunch of other Trump officials who have been prosecuted and convicted. People like Roger Stone, people like George Papadopoulos, the list goes on and on and on. And so we'll see how this plays out. But for now, all we really know is that This is the vague reason for the investigation. We don't have too many details. We're likely to get more details as the story develops. There have not been any criminal charges filed against Giuliani yet, and I think that's a key part of this story to keep in mind. For instance, the Associated Press reports that although the warrants do not mean that charges are near or even expected, it nonetheless represents a significant escalation in the investigation and means that law enforcement officials have persuaded a judge that there's probable cause to believe a search warrant or search of Giuliani's property will turn up evidence of a crime. And this really was a warrant that was, the Justice Department did seek this type of warrant a year ago, but unfortunately the prosecutors here were unable to get that warrant from the DOJ, I should say. So the prosecutors tried to get it from the DOJ, and top officials over at the DOJ would not allow for that warrant to go through. Now, under the Biden administration, the DOJ is much more willing to allow for this investigation to go forward with the search of Giuliani's home and his office. Now, with that said, Giuliani and his lawyer have responded to this, and they argue that this is nothing more than legal thuggery, which is an interesting phrase to use because legal thuggery sounds pretty cool. Illegal thuggery does not sound very cool. But they refer to this as legal thuggery. And I do want to read you a few quotes from Robert Costello, who is Rudy Giuliani's lawyer. He says, quote, "Why would you do this to anyone, let alone someone who was the Associate Attorney General, United States Attorney, the Mayor of New York City, and the personal lawyer to the 45th President of the United States?" Just let that statement sink in for a second, because what he's saying there is, well, this was a man in several different positions of power. Why would you ever want to prosecute someone like that? Well, no one is supposed to be above the law. And so if there is any criminality here, any actual wrongdoing, then regardless of what Rudy Giuliani's past career was, he needs to face the consequences for it. I should also note that in a statement during a press conference, his lawyer was livid about the fact that the DOJ is even conducting this investigation. He believes that the DOJ should not be involved in politically motivated investigations, which I find hilarious. If Giuliani was acting as a foreign agent and did not disclose that to the United States government, that's a crime. He would have to face prosecution for that. That's what's happening right now. But the idea that the Justice Department should be independent of the executive branch or independent of the president is something that I actually do agree with. The only problem here is that the lawyer is arguing for something that the Trump administration certainly didn't practice themselves. Donald Trump did not see the Attorney General as an independent person who shouldn't be influenced by the president. Remember, Donald Trump got rid of Jeff Sessions because Jeff Sessions decided to recuse himself, correctly, by the way, from the Russia investigation. And then after firing Jeff Sessions, he brought on William Barr. And what did William Barr do? Was he independent? No, he carried water for Donald Trump. He intentionally misrepresented the findings of Robert Mueller's report, the so-called Russia investigation. So this idea of the DOJ serving as an independent body, I think, is the correct idea. It's just that we did not see that with the Trump administration, and I find it hilarious that Giuliani's lawyer is now accusing the Biden administration of getting the DOJ to do its dirty work. I'm not buying that at all. There is a ton of criminality in regard to people who had been surrounded by Trump administration officials, people who are part of Trump's campaign. And so we don't know how this is gonna end. All we know is his house got raided here, his office got raided. And as we learn more about the story, we will definitely fill you guys in. For now, I do want to read a few comments from our members and from the super chat section. Al Belzo writes in and says, lucky for Giuliani, Trump pardoned him. Oh, wait. That's right. I mean, there was a lot of pressure for Trump to implement these preemptive pardons. Remember, Matt Gaetz, Congressman Matt Gaetz, also was asking for a preemptive pardon. And luckily, Donald Trump didn't do that with people like Giuliani and Matt Gaetz. So This is the law and order president and all of his cronies, right? All of these people surrounding Donald Trump have faced serious criminal charges. In many cases have been convicted. In this case, his own lawyer is facing a very serious investigation with the DOJ. And Parker writes in and says, I'll say it tonight. Tonight's a historic episode of the Young Turks, first live special in studio since the pandemic. Can't wait for the Biden coverage. Thank you so much. And you guys can definitely check that out after the postgame show tonight.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.